Isaiah 60, 1 through 9. Arise, shine, your light has come, the Lord's glory has shone upon you. And though darkness covers the earth and gloom the nations, the Lord will shine upon you. God's glory will appear over you. Nations will come to your light and kings to your dawning radiance. Lift up your eyes and look around. They are all gathered. They have come to you. Your sons will come from far away and your daughters on caregivers' hips, and then you will see and be radiant. Your heart will tremble and open wide because the sea's abundance will be turned over to you. The nation's wealth will come to you. Countless camels will cover your land, young camels from Midian and from Ephah. They will all come from Sheba carrying gold and incense, proclaiming the Lord's praises. All Kedar's sheep will be gathered for you. Rams from Nebaioth will be your offerings. They will be accepted on my offer, and I will glorify my splendid house. Who are these who fly like clouds, like doves to their shelters? I'm the hope of the coastlands. Ships from Tarshish are in the lead to bring your children from afar, their silver and gold with them, for the name of the Lord your God and for the Holy One of Israel, who has glorified you. This is the word of the Lord. Listen, y'all, I got to be honest. I am terrible at resolutions. I hate to admit it in front of you fine, wonderful people, but New Year's resolutions are kind of like giving things up for Lent for me. They have about the same success rate. If I was keeping official stats, I'd say the success rate is probably in the low single digits in terms of success. That is unless you count my most recent resolution, which is simply to give up resolutions. I'm holding strong on that one for a few years now. It's because resolutions rarely work, right? They're too ambitious because we're poor judges on what we think is possible. They're aspirational. There's nothing wrong with that, so long as you don't beat yourself up when you inevitably fail to reach that aspiration. If you really want success in resolutions this year, here's a couple tips. First, give up on this whole idea of year-long resolutions. Break it down to small monthly resolutions. For me, it means dedicating myself in January to just simply getting better sleep. When February comes, I'm going to make a different resolution. You find that over time, these small resolutions, if you break them up, can lead to some consistent change over time, some healthy habits. Second tip for you to do is to avoid what I just did, telling other people about your resolutions. If you want to succeed, don't tell anybody. They've actually done studies on this. It turns out that telling someone about your resolution tricks you into feeling like you've accomplished something, which actually makes you more likely to give up on the resolution. Shh. I don't do resolutions, but I do enjoy using the end of the year to reflect on everything that's happened in my life over the last year. And since we're heading into a new decade, it's an opportunity to look back where we were 10 years ago. And now I know some of you are going to say, excuse me, sir, actually, the new decade begins at the start of 2021. Or do you seriously think there was a year zero? Okay, tone it down. If that's you, tone it down. Whether you agree with me or not, as a society, I think we all recognize that we have agreed that 2020 is the start of a new decade. So we're going to move forward with that going forward. And second, as a pastor, I have some advice for you. It's advice I received many years ago when I was hiking in the winter snow on some mountains, and I ran into a wise young woman from Arendelle, and she just told me, let it go. Let it go. Don't let it hold you back anymore. Let it go. Turn away and slam that door, because I don't care what you're gonna say. Let the storm rage on. when a new decade actually starts never bothered me anyway. It's funny how some distance makes everything seem small. And the fears that once controlled you can't get to you at all. 4 of you in here know I'm basically just saying, let it go from Frozen. And the 4 that get that love this. Everyone else, whew. And it's okay. If you had a 5-year-old, your life would be ruled by Frozen, let me tell you that. How many Barbie dolls did we get, Frozen Barbie dolls? Multiple Elsas. We're doing good at our house with Frozen. I went back and I actually looked at some of my pictures from 9 years ago. Oh my. And I enjoy seeing people post. There they are. That's what I looked like back then, you know. Center parted hair with a mustache, even as a joke, not a good look. And say what you want about teenage girls and Instagram and this whole culture of taking selfies. Nobody's taking ugly pictures of themselves anymore. So we can credit that as a humanitarian triumph as opposed to this out of focus selfie up here in the right-hand corner. Oh man. I went back and actually looked at some of my Facebook posts from 2009. And the thing is, James will show you a couple of them. I think some of these stand up. Extreme Home Makeover was wonderful. Every Sunday night, I'd come home and watch that show on ABC, and it'd give me tears of happiness because this family of 18 got a 7,000-foot square house that was built in 1 week. It was wonderful. So maybe the ending of Lost, the television show, wasn't perfect, but did I cry? Yes. Were there too many seasons? Yes. Was season 3 terrible? Yes. But was the journey of a lifetime with Jack and Kate and Sawyer and Saeed and Charlie and Locke and Desmond and Boone and Claire and Jen and Shannon and Juliet and Michelle and Michael and Walt, oh, little Walt, was it worth it? Yes. Puppies dressed as cats? Come on. Who doesn't want to see that? And yes, CBS should never be forgiven for allowing 2.5 Men to even make it to air for even 1 season. I stand by these posts 10 years later. Thank you. Getting support from the choir back here. All sorts of organizations have been doing the same thing. They've been looking back on the last decade, ranking the best movies, the best albums, the best songs. In my opinion, it's either Baby by Justin Bieber or Party in the USA by Miley Cyrus. We might disagree, but I think I'm right. The best teams, the best coaches, the best players. The Patriots were unquestionably the best football team of the best of the last decade. Bill Belichick, unquestionably the best coach of the decade. Tom Brady sits alone at the top of Mount Olympus as the best quarterback of the decade, but did that very quarterback with his team down by 1 and 15 seconds left, step under center, survey the field, look left, look right, toss one over the middle, only to have it intercepted and run back for a touchdown, thus cementing a Titans victory? Yes, he did. Titans win, amen. Recently, the Pew Research Center did their own look back at the previous decade, where they looked at the changing religious culture in America. And the study confirmed what many of us have intuitively known for years. There has been a steep decline in the number of people regularly attending church. James has a slide he'll show up there. It might be hard to read, but I'll fill out some of this. There has been a 9-point drop in the percentage of people who attend church at least once a month. A 9-point drop from 54 down to 45. It's corresponding at the same time. The other line, I'm not going to say colors because I'm a little colorblind. The other one that's not, the one that's going up has a corresponding rise in the number of people that are attending incredibly infrequently, once or no times a year. Some researchers and church leaders have argued that this is happening because of a number of factors: low birth rates, particularly among mainline Protestant congregations, or the urbanization of America, making travel and getting to church more difficult, or frankly, more competitive options. Or some have argued that it's economic factors that have forced people into shorter-term, irregular employment with excessively long hours that make it hard for people to be at church more consistently. And while I find those points compelling and certainly probably contributed to some of this, I think the actual data, if we look a little further, shows something beyond birth rates and urbanization and the economy. James, if you'll show that next one. Over the past 10 years, we've seen a 12-point decline in people who actually identify as being Christian. It's one thing to not attend church as frequently, but it's another thing to completely remove that identity of Christian from yourself. A 12-point decline in 10 years. And I think that actually obscures how severe that is. The church in one decade lost 18.5% of itself. Think about that. It's astounding. Nearly a fifth of the people that once considered themselves to be Christians simply said, nope, not anymore. That's why we've seen the rise of these people we call nuns. James, that's the next one there. Nuns, not as in Catholic nuns, but as people that say they have no religious affiliation. There it is. It kind of correlates to the same drop in Christianity. And what makes it especially heartbreaking is almost all of these losses come from our youngest generations. James, if you'll show that next one for me. It's a small slide, so I might need to point some things out for you. The top lines there talk about the generations, the silent generation, baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials. And it's the percent of U.S. adults who identify as Christian. Silent generation, 28 to 45, 84% of you identify as Christian. But if you get down to millennials, people born between 81 and 96, 49%. The numbers there you see about regular church attendance, 35%. 35% of millennials regularly attend a worship service. And here's the funny thing, folks. It's not like millennials are that young anymore. The oldest millennials are almost 40. The youngest millennials are 23. And so wherever you fall in that age range, chances are they're not attending church. If you indulge me for a moment, I'm going to step onto a soapbox. And while you can assume they aren't regularly attending church, it's probably safe to assume they're buried in debt. They're forced to rent an apartment with a couple of roommates. More than likely, they're working a job or multiple jobs that they're probably going to leave in less than 2 or 3 years because there's no avenues for advancement. Because when we restructured our economy after the Great Recession, we just said, all right, boomers, you keep all the money. They're getting married later than previous generations, having less kids later in life. They're buying houses later because how on earth can you save up 20% of a down payment in a housing market like Nashville? Rent.com released some stats in early December comparing rent prices from November 18 to November 19. Anybody want to guess how much rent went up in Green Hills? It's going to blow your mind. 51% in 1 year. I live in East Nashville, with the Bohemia of Nashville. You know, supposedly it's a little cheaper there. Our rent increased by 42% in 1 year. So yeah, best of luck, millennials. Hope to see you in church on Sunday. And here's the thing, the numbers for Generation Z, the generation behind millennials, they're worse than millennials. The church is getting older, smaller, poorer, less influential each and every year. Our denomination loses almost 40,000 people a year, and almost all of those people, it's not because they're leaving the church, it's because they're dying. We're not making new disciples. We're not baptizing new believers. We're not even having enough babies and confirming them to even make a dent in those losses. And so our churches, they shrivel and they shrivel and they die on the vine as the pews become more and more empty every week. And I've seen this on a Presbyterian level. What happens is that these churches get smaller and smaller, and they fall into the hands of the dozen or so people that are left. And they're the people that like things just the way they are. And they take that church and they sit on it. And they say to each other every week, sure would be nice to have some more young people here. Because who's going to take care of this old dinosaur of a building after we're gone? The words of the prophet Isaiah are meant for people like us. People who are disappointed, dispirited, disillusioned, accustomed to decline and failure and death. We are accustomed to institutional death. He's writing to a people that have come back from exile and they've re-inhabited their promised land, and they've seen leader after leader, including Sheshbazzar, try to repeatedly fundraise and get it together and build up the great temple of Jerusalem. But it doesn't happen. And so they're disappointed and dispirited and disillusioned, and they're accustomed to failure. And in that darkness, a new vision is revealed, an epiphany, a stunning act of what we would call a prophetic imagination. And it begins with two simple words, two imperatives, kumi auri, arise, shine, get up, glow, stand up, light up, rise, and reflect the light. It's as though Isaiah is saying to God's people, look over there. The transforming light of God coming is over the horizon. It's almost here. Stand up. If you stand up, you'll see it quicker. And when those rays hit you, you're going to light up, because it might feel like this world around you is dark. But trust me, this light is coming. All you need to do is stand up and you're going to see it. You remember those nations that came and took you? Took your treasures, took your children, and took you and dragged it across the desert into exile, and all your children are scattered around the world. All those nations now are going to see the light reflecting off you, and they're going to want to come and see it. Sounds like Magi following a star, doesn't it? And here's the thing, when they come, they're bringing their treasures with them. The translation I read didn't say it, but other translations say they're bringing with them gold and frankincense. They're bringing livestock and the bounty of the sea. All your brothers and sisters and your children, Jews strewn all across the world, they're coming back to the promised land, and they're bringing silver and gold with them. And all you have to do is lift your eyes and look around, because the light's almost here. If you stand up, you're going to see it. I love the way the Jewish Publication Society translates verse 5. It says, as you behold, you will glow, and your heart will throb and thrill. So these prophetic words, they invite us today to imagine a different future, one of stunning reversals, one where disappointment and delusionment and our calloused attitudes about decline, failure, and death are replaced with a new vision for a bright future. Church, I believe that's the good news we need to hear today. The time for despair is over. The time is now to stand up, to shine, to let our hearts throb and thrill with the light of God coming into this world. And here we are, we stand at the edge of a new decade, a decade preceded by enormous declines in the larger church, and they're declines that we have felt in this very church. Like the larger church, we're smaller, we're older, we're poorer, we're less influential than we once were. And while it might be tempting to hope to recapture those glory days of the past, times have changed and our culture and society has changed. And simply being more enthusiastic about what we do isn't going to be the magic wand you're looking for. 2020, it also represents a critical milestone in the life of this church. It's because in 1920, Broadway and Grace Presbyterian churches combined to form what we now know as Hillsborough Presbyterian Church. So not only is 2020 the start of a new decade, it is the start of a new century, a ministry for this church, a critical juncture. You see on the screen there today is the first of 3 Vision Sundays in 2020. Sundays where we're going to set aside time to talk about where God might be calling this church. And I feel, especially as a new pastor, you're curious about what do I feel, what do I think God is saying to me. I feel it's important for me to set aside time to share that with you. To share some prophetic imagination, where I feel the winds of the Spirit blowing, where I see the light of God beginning to glow. After being down in Hillsborough Village for a little over 30 years, the newly combined church purchased the property we currently sit on, known as Singing Hills. The church actually worshiped in 2 different places for a period of time. Some down in Hillsborough Village, and some came out here in Singing Hills. I've had some interesting conversations with some of our oldest members recently where they told me about some funny quirks at this church, that this church worshiped in the basement for years because the sanctuary wasn't completed. Steve Yoakley was telling me about how as a kid, he remembered walking through the sanctuary, and it was stacked up above his head with newspapers because the sanctuary was an old newspaper storage facility during wartime. It's interesting. The church felt called to leave the safe confines of that church as usual and enter what back then was the frontier of ministry. Out here in the sticks, to go and explore the larger world that God had called them to serve. And as it happens with most churches, once the frontier, either physically or metaphorically, is settled, it ceases to be the frontier. We erect buildings and parking lots, and once these buildings are finished, we install doors, and what do? We lock them. The church, a spiritually living and breathing organism, begins to get comfortable in our new home. And years later, what was once a frontier can now feel like a fortress. You know, the classic image of the church is a boat on the seas, moving at times in a tumultuous sea, a place of refuge from the constant motion, on a journey to God, a place of salvation and safety for all who would get on her. But that isn't the image embraced by the mainline Protestant church. Gone are the vessels that sail to the frontier. Now we have stone fortresses, immovable and cold. The church, which was once centered around this idea of a vibrant community that's centered around a shared mission, now is a building, Fort Church, high up on a hill. And so for the church in the new decade, in the new century, not only to survive but thrive, we must once more seek to live in the frontier, to see the church as a community of believers set on making disciples of Jesus Christ. And to do that, we must go, enmesh ourselves into our communities. We're spread out all over the place. We're like a big giant donut on the south side of Nashville. We got people all over the place. We are to spread out to our communities where we live, where we work, and invite others to follow Jesus. The fortress mentality means focusing on protecting things the way they are and barring the gates to anyone who would change us. But a frontier mentality realizes that God has always and always will call us to something new. Nothing is ever fixed. There is always more light and more truth to be discovered. The fortress mentality says, we're here. They know who we are. They know what we do. Let them come to us. The frontier mentality understands that making disciples has always meant following wherever Jesus leads. And Jesus is always leading away from these walls, out into the city to reach the last and the least. The fortress mentality looks at ministries and buildings and programs and says, this is what I want out of them. But the frontier mentality looks at those same things and asks, how do we use these tools of ministry to make more disciples of Jesus? Let's do that. We got to learn to live in the frontier. Does anybody know the great ends of the church? Have you ever heard that before? It's in our book of order. The great ends of the church. What's the whole point of the church? Does anyone know this? I'm going to say it, and as I start whispering it, you're going to read it. To glorify God and enjoy God forever. It's in our book of order. It's in our Constitution. That's what we say the point of this whole thing is, to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. I feel like we all get the glorifying God part. But somehow I feel like churches tend to miss the second part. That being in the church is meant to be a joyous endeavor. I don't think it's a heresy to say this, but it might shock some of you. I think church should be fun. I mean it. I think church should be fun. It should be full of laughter and silliness and passion and soul and intelligence and imagination. Those are all things we ask new elders. Do you believe in these things? Do you affirm to serve God with these things? In a world full of endless entertainment options, why would anyone subject themselves to church if it bores them to tears and it's drudgery? When life is enjoyed in community, when we eat and drink and laugh and play and dance and sing and serve together, God is glorified. So if we're going to live on the frontier, we got to learn to make it fun. Look, I'm a good Presbyterian and I love Mr. Rogers. If we had saints in the PCUSA, he'd be one. He modeled the kindness and empathy to generations of children. And if you may or may not know, he is an ordained Presbyterian minister up in the Pittsburgh area. And he saw it as his ministry and his life's calling to serve and minister to children in this way. But here's the thing, if I'm being really honest with you, I don't think he's a great model for the church in a new decade or a new century. His empathy, his compassion, his thoughtfulness, I want to keep that. Don't get me wrong. But the Mr. Rogers style, not so much. Whether church leaders would tell you or not, there's always an equation we're trying to solve in our head. I'm letting you in on some big secrets here. Ready? Here it is. Here's the equation. What we feel God is calling us to do minus what we think will offend someone in church equals what we finally end up doing. There it is. It's the secret equation. You know it. Secret's out. Don't tell Presbyterian. What we feel God is calling us to do minus what we think will offend someone in the church equals what we end up finally doing. Another way of putting it is this way. What's the most we can get away with while keeping the most people happy? And here's another secret. Those equations, they are unsolvable. Many have tried, many have failed. Nobody has ever solved them. And even if they were solvable, what's the point of them? They're not even asking the right question. We should be asking here on this frontier that we're making fun, what is God calling us to do? What's our meaning? What's our purpose, our mission, our joy? And work out that answer and pursue that answer. So this is where it relates to Mr. Rogers. I believe God is calling us out of an era of Mr. Rogers, the very model of inoffensiveness, into an era of boldness. I'm not saying intentional offensiveness, but into an era of boldness. There's a benediction you might have heard me use before. And in it are these provocative lines. May God give you the grace not to sell yourself short. Grace to risk something big for something good. Because remember that the world is now too dangerous for anything but truth, and too small for anything but love. So if the good news truly is good, if grace really is irresistible, if this world desperately needs truth and love, what's the point of timidity? God is calling us to something bold. Now, I know that's not the Presbyterian way. We are the frozen chosen. We signal the Spirit moving within us with an affirmative grunt. But for the church on the frontier to not only survive but thrive, boldness is required. Boldness shows that this faith is worth having, that this community is worth joining. It demonstrates the depth of our commitment, the worthiness of our cause. Boldness means recapturing that charisma, that sense of living and moving in the Holy Spirit, a spirit that's inspiring us and moving us to express our faith passionately. So it means making worship this deeply moving experience every week, full of sights and sounds that move us beyond the subtle and mild ways. Boldness means having the courage to tell Nashville that all are welcome here. All are welcome to worship, to serve, to lead, to enjoy life regardless of race, ethnic or cultural background, social status, gender, sexual orientation, age, education, and even political affiliation. You're welcome here. So the prophet's call to us today is to stand up and shine. Rise, radiate God's light. Look up. Look around you, because God's light is almost here, and all you gotta do is stand up and see it, because the time for despair is over. This today is a call for hope, to shake us from those shackles of disappointment and disillusionment, because behold, the new thing God is doing among us needs to be seen. And so may we glow with God's light, and may our hearts throb and thrill. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.